Today's video is brought to you by the Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth from Fantasy Flight Games, a fully cooperative board game for 1 to 5 players set in J.R.R. Tolkien's world that we know and love. Stick around after the video to find out more about starting your own journey in Middle-earth. Hey everyone, we've come to the 8th and final episode of Season 1 of the Rings of Power. We got the reveal of Sauron, saw the Rings of Power being forged, and the identity of the stranger is heavily implied. Before we dive in, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss new videos as we cover all things Middle-earth here on Nerd of the Rings. The episode opens on the stranger as he journeys alone in Erin Gallen, which is Greenwood the Great, much later known as Mirkwood. As he remembers Nori's words about him being good, he sees a small figure who he chases after and drops his favorite apple in the process. The figure looks to be Nori, but in a pretty cool transformation is revealed to be one of the mystics. The other two appear, saying, "We come to serve you, Lord Sauron," as they bow and the stranger seems pretty confused. After the title sequence, we see Galadriel and Halbrand nearing the end of their 6-day non-stop journey to Eregion, and Halbrand looks like he's barely hanging on. Meanwhile, Celebrimbor and Elrond note Gil-galad's pending arrival, and Celebrimbor says if only there was a way of doing more with less, noting that the sun itself started as something no bigger than the palm of his hand. This refers to the creation of the sun and moon, as when the 2 trees of Valinor were destroyed, the last fruit from the gold tree of Lorelin was made into the sun, while the last flower of the silver tree of Telperion was made into the moon. Elrond and Celebrimbor are pretty shocked to find Galadriel, in Middle-earth. And we get our first up-close look at Eregion helmets as 2 soldiers help Halbrand off his horse. As we see Halbrand being tended, we get a glimpse of a basin of water which calls to mind the Mirror of Galadriel. Though we've seen this and another such basin in Lindon, we don't know if there's any connection here to the mirror Galadriel will one day possess. As Galadriel and Elrond catch up, he says he shouldn't have sent her on the ship, and he should have trusted her. A mistake he says he won't make again. Galadriel says she leapt from the ship because she knew that she was not yet worthy of it, and her task wasn't complete. Looking back, it's kind of crazy that this is only the 2nd episode we've seen Galadriel and Elrond together. I've long said I think Elrond would have made a great choice for the main lead of the series, and I think there's a lot of potential for these 2 characters to play off each other going forward. We then cut to Celebrimbor, who looks to be packing things up in the forge, when who should walk in but a much improved looking Halbrand. Apparently, Halbrand has heard of the Celebrimbor, and says the master he apprenticed to used to speak of the wonders of his craft. Now if you're watching this, chances are you've already seen the episode, or at the very least you're okay with spoilers now for this entire episode. So in light of what we're going to find out soon enough, we'll point out that Halbrand's former master he's referring to is likely Morgoth, for he is Sauron in disguise. More on that soon enough. Now Sauron was originally a servant of the Vala Aule, the smith of the Valar. However, I believe he's talking about Morgoth here, because Sauron turned to darkness so early that I doubt Celebrimbor would have gained any renown as a smith, or even been around, when Sauron still served the Valar. Halbrand says he's never seen anything like the gemstones Celebrimbor has set in a box. Now in the books, these are simply a sapphire, a ruby, and a stone of adamant. I would think Sauron likely would have caught a glimpse of the Silmarils in Morgoth's crown at one time or another, so it's possible he's just lying here. The 2 smiths go on to touch on the topic of the mithril the elves possess, and Halbrand recommends combining it with the right alloy to amplify the mithril's qualities. Celebrimbor calls it an intriguing suggestion, and Halbrand responds, "Call it a gift." At which point, all of my fellow book nerds pretty much were left with no doubt that this dude was Sauron. I've got a lot of thoughts on this development, some we'll get to in a bit, and some will have to wait for a full-on season review. Cut to Numenor, where King Tar Palantir's health is failing. Pharazôn has brought draftsmen and apprentices from across Numenor to capture the king's visage for a glorious tomb when he dies. A key line here is Pharazôn saying that the tomb will grant the king immortality in stone that no man, not even a king, can attain in life. It's a small moment, but it points us to where his eventual storyline will lead. A first hint of Pharazôn's fear of mortality. We see Elendil's daughter, Eärien, drawing during her hour block with the king, during which Tar Palantir wakes and seems disoriented, calling Eärien Miriel, and saying if the old ways of their people are not soon restored, the island will fall. Tar Palantir opens the passage to the upstairs room, saying he looked into the Seeing Stone for far too long, and can no longer separate what is from what was, and what was from what will be. Now we know from the books that Denethor is another character who would spend much time gazing into a Palantir, which for him caused great stress and premature aging. Aarion pauses to look at what I believe may be Turin's dragon helm of Dorloman before making her way to the Palantir, and we cut away just before she pulls off the cover. This really caught my attention because we never go back to Aarion in the rest of this episode. Presumably she'll see the same vision Miriel and Galadriel did of Numenor's downfall, but it kind of felt like an odd thing to leave hanging. If Season 2 doesn't come out for another 2 years, I wonder how many people will remember this as one of the storylines. Back in Eregion, Gil-galad has arrived, and Celebrimbor pitches the idea of a mithril crown to solve the elves' problem, saying a circular form is ideal so the light will arc back upon itself, building to a power that is all but unbounded. Now, while Gil-galad has been a pretty stern character in the show thus far, I did like that he seemed totally turned off by the idea of such a crown being placed on his head. Gil-galad seems to think they are out of time and says the tree in Lindon will soon lose its last leaf. Basically, it's like a Beauty and the Beast rose petal situation, but instead of remaining a beast, the elves are gonna die. Celebrimbor reveals that speaking with Halbrandt was the key that unlocked the dam, and they're on the cusp of creating a new kind of power. Not of the flesh, but over the flesh. A power of the unseen world. You'll recall these are the same words Adar uses when he describes Sauron's attempts in the far north to create a new power. And it's here that Galadriel starts to put the pieces together. Gil-galad shuts it down, ordering everyone to disband Eregion and leave for Lindon to sail west. Galadriel asks Celebrimbor where he heard those words, and he seems kind of absent-minded in response, saying he thinks it was from a conversation with his smiths. I think him seeing off here is a clue that even at the end of this episode, when we seem to have gotten our main answers, there could be more going on here than it seems. And his absent-mindedness that we've seen before in the show could point to a theory that this is not Sauron's first trip to Eregion. Next we see Elrond catching up to Gil-galad, who has his great spear Aiglos, a spear that we should no doubt see in battle at the very least during the War of the Last Alliance in Season 5. Elrond reminds Gil-galad of his words, that hope is never meager, and it seems the king relents and the forge is back in business. We get a few shots of the forge firing up and some background characters who are likely meant to represent the Gwaith y Myrdain, the people of the Jewel Smiths, the group of elven smiths that Celebrimbor leads in constructing the Rings of Power. We see Halbrand and Celebrimbor working together in the forge as Galadriel seems to be starting to wonder if Halbrand maybe isn't the person she assumed he was. She talks to an elven archivist, who must not have the abilities of Ask Jeeves back in Numenor, because he seems daunted by the task of looking up Southlander bloodlines. Now I didn't catch this on first watch, but Celebrimbor and Elrond note as they pass that they have 3 weeks for a labor that could take 3 centuries. This, I believe, is a direct reference to the time compression we've seen throughout the show, as in the books, Sauron begins influencing the elves in 1200 of the Second Age, and the 16 rings, the 9 for men and 7 for dwarves, are created around 1500 of the Second Age, so over a period of 300 years. Halbrand meets Galadriel in the same courtyard and marvels at being in Eregion working with the Jewel Smiths, and thanks Galadriel for pushing him to heights no one else could have. He says he'll see to it that no one ever forgets that, and it's definitely a creepy moment. Back with the stranger, the mystics say he had a veil placed on his mind by the ones who cast him down. Now I honestly wasn't 100% sure if Meteor Man truly had amnesia or if there was just a language barrier between he and the Harfoots. It certainly seems like we get confirmation of the former. The mystics believe he's Sauron, presumably trapped in this mental blockade by the Valar. They reveal the constellation he's searching for is called the Hermit's Hat and lies in the east, in the lands of Rhûn. In the early days, Morgoth had a strong presence in the east, and in the books, Sauron plays on those old allegiances to gain strength in the lands of Rhûn, one of the lands where he's most successful in gaining followers. As they declare that he is Lord Sauron, the stranger stands up, and the wind begins to swirl around him before one of the mystics knocks him out. The 4 Harfoots show up and attempt to free the stranger from his bonds, but it turns out they're pulling the switcheroo, and we see the freaky eyes and shape-shifting once again. And again, I really like this shape-shifting effect, despite the fact that I would have loved to see Sauron shape-shifting instead, and we still have no clue who these mystics are. Sadok gets wounded with a knife, and Nori is about to get the same when the winds begin to swirl once more. Side note, while it's not something I talk a lot about while breaking down the episodes because I'm focused on the references and the visuals, The Stranger's music reminded me that we certainly have some great musical themes in this show. Despite any critiques I may have about the choices in the show, the choice of the music isn't one of them. I feel like Bear McCreary did a really good job. Meteor Man does another ground pound and knocks 2 of the mystics down, while the third uses her staff to protect herself. We get a bit of a wizard duel type fighting before Nori gives the stranger a pep talk and the mystic's staff. He interrupts the mystic saying, "From shadow you came, from shadow I bid you return," which some may say is pretty close to Gandalf's line, "Go back to the shadow to the Balrog," but I think this is a solid line on its own. The mystics say he is not Sauron, he is the other, the Istar. Istar, as we'll later see, translates to wise one or wizard. He raises the staff and we see the mystics in a very Nazgul Wraithworld-esque shot, possibly meaning they are in the unseen world. I'm sure some folks will no doubt wonder who these mystics were, and I really can't say for certain. Perhaps some evil spirits or lesser Maiar. Those are my best guesses at this point. For the longest time, I thought they were simply human mages that were cultists loyal to Sauron. But that unseen world presence makes me wonder if they were perhaps some previous experiment of Sauron's with the unseen world. Perhaps it's best left a mystery, but I thought for as over-explained as the Mithril origin was, this was comparatively under-explained. Anyway, the Nazgals disintegrate into a ton of moths or butterflies, and the staff disintegrates as well. Oh, and before we cut away, Sadok, he's mortally wounded. He's gonna fall behind, but he gets to see one last sunrise, and the hobbits are sad. Checking in with the Númenóreans, we first focus on the green bow of return on the Númenórean ship. It's a small detail but a cool one, as this was a custom of Númenor as a symbol of good fortune. Obviously, as Valindir looks upon it, he's experienced the opposite, having lost his friend Ontamo, and believing to have lost Isildur as well. And next we get what is probably my favorite scene in the episode. After the previous episode, I was a bit worried that Elendil would turn his back on the faithful for a time, and possibly even be tempted to join Pharazôn. Together, Elendil and Miriel talk about the price of being faithful, and that it is unknown and may be dear. And I honestly got goosebumps when Elendil says, "We have little choice but to keep serving, and I for one will see to it that we make the end worth the price." It's a great moment for this character as he fully embraces being among one of the faithful, and that it comes not during a moment of triumph, but when he is at his lowest, having lost his wife, believing to have lost his son, and returning home having suffered great defeat. I didn't mention it before, but Miriel's blindness I think is a very interesting choice, and I think will turn out to make her character all the more compelling. Elendil and Miriel are definitely one of the combos of characters I'm most looking forward to in Season 2. They move to the deck to discover black banners flying across Númenor, signifying Miriel's father, King Tar Palantir, is dead. And our final shot in Númenor for Season 1 is Pharazôn looking upon the deceased king, not with a sense of ambition or evil, but with tears in his eyes. Perhaps he mourns for the king, but I think even more he mourns for men, that they are doomed to grow old and die, which I'm sure will lead to big things with his character in Season 2. Again, he's one of the characters I'm most looking forward to next season, and honestly, Númenor as a whole. I think Númenor could be kind of hit or miss in Season 1, but I think Season 2 has some good potential. Now that Galadriel and Halbrand are removed, we can get to some of the good tension between the Kingsmen and the Faithful we know about from the books. Back in Eregion, there's an explosion as they continue to attempt bonding the Mithril with other ores. Halbrand suggests that rather than forcing the metals to join, they should be coaxed together, and I honestly have no idea what that difference would be. In The Lord of the Rings and the Appendices, we are told that the smiths of Eregion learned much from Sauron in art and magic. So far, it seems like Sauron has just told Celebrimbor how to combine 2 metals. Again, not really sure what to make of this approach. In the next scene, Halbrand reveals it's too much power for one object, so they're making 2. And here Galadriel confronts Halbrand, revealing that the last king of the Southlands died 1,000 years ago with no heir. and Halbrandt says he indeed told the truth when he said he found it on a dead man. He says he's been awake since before the breaking of the first silence, and in that time he's had many names. Galadriel tries to stab him and he stops her with ease, throwing her down where she falls into her flashback memory in Valinor. This moment is very similar to when Frodo falls in Shelob's cave and lands in Lorien, where Galadriel helps him up. She meets Finrod, who tells her his task was not to hunt Sauron, but to ensure peace, which is Sauron's task as well. He encourages her to simply let the work of the Rings of Power proceed and say nothing to the other elves. She turns away from this fake Finrod, and Sauron changes the vision to the raft. There, as Halbrand, he says that when Morgoth was defeated, it was like a great clenched fist had released its grip on his neck, and at last he felt the light of the One again. Now the One here refers to Eru Ilúvatar, the god of Tolkien's world. They go on to talk about whether or not Sauron could ever be forgiven for his deeds. And on rewatch, I don't think it's a slam dunk that Sauron is truly repenting of his deeds. In fact, I don't buy it at all. I think he's just manipulating Galadriel in an effort to get her to join him. At least that's my hope. As I've said many times, I personally don't have much interest in a good guy Sauron. Perhaps immediately after Morgoth's defeat, but by this stage in the game, this dude is evil. Sauron shows her a vision reflected in the water, where we get a somewhat obscured image of Sauron crowned, with Galadriel by his side, each in clearly different attire than what they are currently wearing. And here Halbrand gives his pitch to rule the world side by side together. He says, "I alone can see your light." And this is the first time I've seen Galadriel's eyes seem to shine with the light of Valinor. Peter Jackson famously used a special lighting rig to make Cate Blanchett's eyes seem to sparkle with the light of Valinor. So I've been hoping for an eventual similar appearance in this rendition. In this dialogue, we get a couple of references to Galadriel's later temptation of the One Ring. Sauron says he would make her not a tyrant, but a queen. And in a direct quote of Galadriel's temptation, "stronger than the foundations of the earth." He goes on to say that Galadriel binds him to the light, and he binds her to power. Galadriel refuses, and I think what Sauron is getting at next here is that without his help via the Rings of Power, the elves will fade and the shadow will cover all the lands of Middle-earth. And in one of the cooler moments of this exchange, Halbrand gets heated and asks what she will do when she tells the elves that Sauron lives because of her, with his voice going all freaky and veins starting to appear across his face. Galadriel yells back and Sauron gives a scream as we see his slit pupils appear for the first time. Also, I notice his teeth are a bit more jagged in this image as well. Galadriel goes to stab him but is submerged underwater as she was in episode 2 before Halbrand saved her. She wakes to Elrond and yells, "Deceiver," then makes him prove who he is, which is probably a good tactic from here on out. Elrond says they met when he was orphaned and alone, which immediately made me wonder where Elros was at the time. This also makes me wonder if this rules out that this version of Elrond was raised by Maglor and Maithros, if Galadriel was the first to find them. It's hard to believe that she would turn the twins over to Sons of Feanor in that case. Galadriel rushes off to Celebrimbor, and I thought for sure she was going to try to stop the process or she'd be too late. But instead she says that instead of 2 rings they should make 3. 1 would corrupt, 2 would divide, but 3 would have balance. She says the powers they forge must be for elves alone, untouched by other hands. Now we saw in her vision that Sauron wants the crafting to continue, so I was surprised to see there's no real conversation or discussion about the potential repercussions here. I suppose her making the demand of 3 rings and the fact that Sauron is not there anymore to take part in forging them is what will make the difference of these rings being untainted by Sauron, but that's just my best guess at the reasoning here. Celebrimbor states that he's determined the purity of the lesser ores is crucial, which yeah dude, you should totally use the good stuff. He says he needs gold and silver from Valinor, repeating his line that true creation requires sacrifice. And it just so happens Galadriel's got a dagger from Valinor with both. Back with Nori and the stranger, he reveals he must go to Rhûn to discover more of who he is. He says traveling alone, it's a journey, but adventures must be shared. Nori said she's had enough adventure, and for a moment I thought, oh wow, they're actually going to seg the Harfoots out of the main story and avoid the wizard making a hobbit go on an adventure trope. But about 2 minutes later, Nori's family encourages her to go. They say their goodbyes, and hey, I'm a dad, I've got a heart, so yeah, despite not being the biggest fan, I felt the tugging on the heartstrings a bit when she said goodbye to her family. But by the time we're saying another goodbye to Poppy, I was pretty ready to get back to the rings. On that note, I was surprised Poppy didn't tag along as the Sam to Nori's Frodo. Though I wouldn't be shocked if Season 2 opens with Isildur being rescued by Beric, like Aragorn and Brago, and Poppy following behind and dropping eaves like Sam. When the stranger says Nori should lead, and she has her Frodo moment of saying she doesn't know which way to go, I thought for a moment the wizard would say left, like Gandalf does in Fellowship of the Ring, but instead he says, when in doubt, always follow your nose, as Gandalf tells Merry in Moria. So they mixed a couple Lord of the Rings references this time. Now no doubt multitudes of folks will immediately jump to this being concrete proof that this is Gandalf, because hey, he said that line that Gandalf says. But I honestly think there's still a decent chance he's a blue wizard. From a practical perspective, I can understand why they would use Gandalf instead of a blue wizard. He's an iconic character and you can market him to casual fans, despite how much it may rub the book nerds like myself the wrong way when you've got the blue wizards right there in the canon. However, I think what they've done here may actually be them trying to get both in the long run. For now, the news will be spreading that this show has Gandalf in it, by people assuming that's what this line means. But with the heavy focus on Rune, and even the line that adventures are meant to be shared, I still think there's a decent chance he's a blue wizard. Gandalf tells us in The Lord of the Rings his name's in all the regions of Middle-earth, but says, "To the east I go not." Also worth noting is that the X-ray during this scene says, "There are many stories that have been told of wizards or Istari in later ages, but not all of them have yet been heard." And actor Daniel Wayman, in an interview that posted right after the episode dropped, wouldn't say for certain who he plays. So I think the idea that he is Gandalf is far from a done deal. And if it's revealed that he isn't in Season 2, it will cause a new wave of news. It's just my theory, but I'm still on Team Blue Wizard until the proof is definitive. Back in Eregion, we get the melting down of Galadriel's dagger, and Elrond drops in the Mithril, which causes the molten metal to look like the Eye of Sauron for a moment. And finally, we get some forging of Rings of Power. I love the glimpses of the rings being crafted and really wish we would have gotten more such things in this show. The rings themselves look awesome. There's no mistaking Nenya, Narya, and Vilya. And even though they don't look like their film counterparts, they look great. And I think the music here fits wonderfully with the creation of the ring, as there's a bit of an undertone of darkness within. What isn't clear here is whether the 9 and the 7 rings had already been created. By the books, they should have been created before Sauron departs. And the way Galadriel says the powers we craft here today, to me sounds like there's possibly been more powers crafted prior. I guess we'll find out perhaps in Season 2. Elrond holds the scroll after playing Sherlock for a moment, so he's finally wise to the fact that Halbrand is definitely not who he claimed to be. As Celebrimbor looks proudly upon his creation, we transition to the physical eye of Halbrand, back to the non-slit pupil as he looks upon Mount Doom with a bit of a smirk. He starts his walk toward the Mountain of Fire, presumably to forge his one ring to rule them all as we fade to black. This shot reminds me of the final shot of the Two Towers, where the camera pans up to Mordor, with fell beasts circling around the lands. We also got an end credits song on this one, which reminded me of the song that ends the Two Towers, Gollum's song. They feel pretty similar in tone and tempo. Now this was the first time I'd heard the track, and I'm not immediately a fan of it. We'll see if I like it any more hearing it a couple more times, but my initial reaction was the melancholy feel felt a lot less dark and menacing than I'd expect from the Ringverse. I'm really curious to see how this show holds up under a repeat viewing now that Season 1 is over, especially the Halbrand stuff, which I think will raise more eyebrows under repeat viewing as to why he would act the way he does. One theory that's been going around is that Sauron didn't assume the form of Halbrand until after the eruption of Mount Doom, and that someone like Isildur will stumble upon Halbrand's dead body. I gotta admit that would be kind of a clever and interesting twist if Sauron posed as different people throughout the season and had possibly been to Eregion before. But I honestly haven't seen much evidence the show is that clever. Now this video is already plenty long, but I wanted to close with a few quick thoughts on this episode in particular. I've mentioned some things I enjoy throughout, to which I'll also add off the top of my head that I really like Charles Edwards as Celebrimbor. He isn't what I envisioned when he was first revealed, but I've really liked his performance. He embodies that blind ambition that I hope to see in the character. I thought the Halbrandt Sauron revelation, despite the fact that I didn't want Halbrandt to be Sauron, was well done in terms of how they presented it and especially how Charlie Vickers played it. I think I would have really enjoyed him bringing more of this undercurrent of evil to Eregion in the form of more screen time there. That being said, I feel really let down by how brief the creation of the Rings of Power was in this show. I said going into the show it would be important to me that they nail the big canon moments, specifically mentioning the creation of the Rings of Power, the War of the Elves and Sauron, the fall of Numenor, and the War of the Last Alliance. Sadly, the first of that list felt crammed into about 15 minutes of a finale episode. And while the forging of the 3 rings I thought turned out well, it just seemed like a disappointment that we saw nothing of the other 16. It's hard not to look at this and feel that a potential Anatar and Eregion storyline was cast aside so that we could play Mystery Man with Sauron. Thus, the entire creation of the Rings of Power is crammed in. Sauron has not a fair emissary of the Valar type visage, but rather a grimy human one. We only see 3 out of 19 rings. We never see Gil-galad and Elrond reject Sauron when he tries to infiltrate Lindon. And Galadriel is certainly not mistrusting of Sauron until it's like way too late. It quite simply did not live up to my expectations. This season was the definition of a mixed bag for me. There were moments I genuinely loved, and characters, locations, and one particular storyline that I thought were great. And there were other moments, some dialogue, and story decisions that totally fell flat. At the end of the day, I really truly hope the folks making this series take a good look at what worked and what didn't in this first season, and adjust accordingly going into season 2. As for going into more in-depth thoughts on the entire season, I kinda wanna let this finale simmer a bit and rewatch at least some of the early season before making such a video. So let me know in the comments what you thought of this episode, and definitely let me know if you'd like me to do a full review of Season 1. Looking ahead to Season 2, I think to paraphrase Saruman, they have work to do. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil 19, Listen Me the Cinda, Celebrimbor, The Mighty Mim, Team Weasel, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, Toby Mob's Music, CCDC Red Team, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Salim Rahman, Zetrock, Berto Berg, Grand Strategy Nerd, Graham Darricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Michael Wu, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description and purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.